In last week's Wall Street Journal, Heather MacDonald, who is a prolific author and fellow at the Manhattan Institute, wrote an editorial called How to Serve White Victims. It profiled a story in Oakland, California, which, in the truest sense of the word, is unbelievable in its absurdity and offensiveness. And let me tell you, if the details of this story were substituted and they dealt with black people instead of white people, you would know all about it. You would not need to go to Timeless with Julie Hartman to learn about it. It would be on the cover of every newspaper. It would be on the screen of every major media outlet. So why is it that we aren't learning about it when, again, the details are pertaining to white people? We're going to get into that, but first, I'd like to tell you quickly about MyPillow. I use many MyPillow products, several times a day, actually. I walk into work wearing the My Slippers because they are so comfortable, and then at the last minute, I change into the heels that you see on camera. I sleep on my pillows and the Giza Dream bed sheets, and I use my towels. And you can get all of these great products at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman, which is my last name, spelled Hartman. There's a big deal right now specifically for the Giza Dream bed sheets. You'll get 60% off of them with that promo code. That comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. You'll get a set for as low as $39.99, and for a limited time, with any purchase, you'll also receive Mike Lindell's softcover book free with the promo code Hartman. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square or call 1-800-566-6745 and you guessed it, use the promo code Hartman, spelled Hartman. So on June 26th of this year, 2023, in case you don't know what year it is, Karen Fleshman, who is apparently an anti-racist consultant, went to the victim services team of Alameda County. Alameda County is here in California. It's actually a part of the city of Oakland. And so this individual, this anti-racist consultant, led the victim services team in a training called How to Serve White Victims. You can tell by the title that already there's an element of weirdness and absurdity surrounding it. How to serve white victims. Shouldn't the training be how to serve victims, period? If any specification must be made, perhaps it should be, how to serve rape victims, how to serve arson victims, i.e., shouldn't the distinction be about the crime as opposed to the race of the people who are the victims of the crime? So this victim services team is comprised of dozens of individuals, social workers in Oakland, California, who provide both psychological and financial counseling to victims of various, often violent crimes. This lady, Karen Fleshman, was brought in by the district attorney of Alameda County to conduct this training. This district attorney is named Pamela Price. I, on a recent episode of Julie Noted, talked about the distinctions between federal and state prosecutors. At the federal level, federal prosecutors are appointed by the President of the United States. They're called U.S. attorneys. But on the state level or the district level, prosecutors are not appointed, but rather they are voted into power, into their position by voters in that particular state or district. And that is an important distinction because unlike federal prosecutors, U.S. attorneys, state or district prosecutors, district attorneys, are politicians as well as prosecutors. So they are affiliated with political parties and they run based on a certain candidacy and promise to their constituents. So in many cases, district attorneys, certainly if they are running for the Democratic Party, talk a lot about wanting to advance social justice issues. It shows you how politicized our system of justice has become, that the people who are in charge of prosecuting, who are in charge of running things like victim services units, are again more focused on politics than they are on executing their job in an objective and non-favoritism manner. But sadly, that is the situation that we are now in. So this district attorney, Pamela Price, has brought in this Karen Fleshman, the anti-racist consultant, to run this training. And Heather MacDonald actually obtained PowerPoint slides from this training, which reveal this absurd nature of the program. Now, it is important to note that one of the opening slides of this training said, quote, white victims are entitled to the same compassion and practices as all victims, but the rest of the PowerPoint tells a different story. Let's look, for instance, at the key takeaways slide of this presentation. There are 3 bullet points that I'd like to read to you, and you tell me if they indicate that, quote, white victims are entitled to the same compassion and practices as all victims. Takeaway number 1 is that white people are not entitled to harm you. Takeaway 2 is, quote, when interacting with white victims, speak up for yourself or for your coworkers. And then number 3 is, quote, if a white victim continues to harm you, ask that they be transferred. So let's pause here. As I mentioned a few moments ago, one of the questions here that I would think is central to the entire story, but not one that people in this victim services unit seem to ask, is why are you making a distinction between white victims and other victims? If you are making a distinction in the training or in the services that you are providing, clearly there's a point to that distinction. Otherwise, you wouldn't be making a distinction. So why is it that white victims have to be dealt with differently than those of a different race? To illustrate my point that the distinction here isn't just a mistake, it matters, let's try substituting white victims for black victims. So let's reread this takeaway slide and see what it would sound like and see how it strikes you if we just put in black instead of white. What if there were a key takeaway slide that said, black victims are not entitled to harm you? When interacting with black victims, speak up for yourself or for your coworkers. And if a black victim continues to harm you, ask that they be transferred. If that were the case, that it were black victims inserted there instead of white victims, we all know what we would be hearing. Black people aren't entitled to harm you? Are you saying that black people think that they're entitled to harm you? Are you saying that black people are more likely to harm you than any other race? Why are you singling out black people, huh, you racist? That's what we would be hearing. And frankly, that would be true. There would be a totally beyond legitimate point to that charge. Why would you single out black victims as opposed to victims of any other race? So when it's white victims, it doesn't matter. But when it's black victims, I think we can all agree that it doesn't sound right. It sounds actually quite bigoted and contrary to the whole project of this consultant to be providing anti-racist training. It is extremely racist to single out one group. Now, people who are proponents or people who are defending this type of training may say that, well, white victims deserve to have harsher restrictions placed on them or should be beholden to harsher procedures than black victims because historically it was the opposite. This is their argument, that black victims were treated more harshly than white victims. It's the whole reparations argument that in order to level the playing field, you need to treat white people more harshly than black people because historically it was the opposite. That argument has never made sense to me. Because let's take the case of a white victim. They should not have to pay for the sins of their ancestors. If their ancestors were even the perpetrators of this racism against black people, which we don't know. We don't know if the person at hand actually was the descendant of a Jim Crow enforcer in the South, for instance. It's really an absurd line of argument for several reasons, because first, that person can no more help that they were born the descendant of a Jim Crow racist than a descendant of a Jim Crow victim can help that they were born into that position. We need to judge people on who they are, not their skin color or their heritage. And also, as I just said, a lot of people who are white aren't the descendants of racists. A lot of people who are white are the descendants of people who fought for the Union against slavery in the Civil War, or people who lived in the North who were not enforcing certain discriminatory practices. So this whole white people need to be treated more harshly because of this reparative element, it just doesn't hold up. So that's the key takeaway slide. There was another slide in this fabulous training that talks about white supremacy culture. Perfectionism Objectivity, a sense of urgency, and individualism were cited in this victim services training on how to treat white victims as, quote, white supremacist traits. Perfectionism, objectivity, a sense of urgency, and individualism. So as Heather MacDonald eloquently and brilliantly said, quote, perhaps it's harmful to expect government employees to respond to crimes objectively and urgently. Well, that's precisely it. Why else would a training about how to treat white people need to identify certain traits as being white supremacist? Clearly, if they think that these traits are white supremacist, they want to behave in the exact opposite way of those traits, which would mean that perfectionism, objectivity, a sense of urgency, and individualism should not be held up, and in fact, the very reverse negative image of that should be pursued. This is not just specific to this one training. Some of you who are watching may think, well, this is just one off example of this random county in California who had some crazy anti-racist consultant. No, this idea that certain traits are white supremacist, certain traits that all of us ought to buy into and subscribe to and that benefit all of us, are supposedly white supremacists. This is not a new idea. For instance, the Smithsonian Institute, the once respected, lovely Smithsonian Institute, in 2020 released this white traits guide, this chart, in which they also argued that objectivity, linear thinking, hard work, and respect for authority are traits of white supremacy. So again, those things, although not explicitly said by the Smithsonian Institute, ought to be counteracted if you want to be anti-racist, anti-white supremacist. The Oregon Department of Education in 2021 released a memo that said that finding one right answer in math is white supremacy. Do you know how racist this is to say, for instance, that finding one right answer in math or that treating certain people with objectivity, having respect for authority, is white supremacy? That is so racist because it indicates that these traits must make a white person special to have these traits, and Black people are unable to practice these traits. It's actually just deeply, deeply, deeply racist, which is so funny because in a truly Orwellian fashion, this training is called anti-racist. These diktats are called anti-racist, and they are the opposite. It is saying that there is something special about white students to find one right answer in math. Unbelievable. So I want people to see that, where in the case of this training, these aren't just absurdities of someone who's lost their mind and they're putting it on a PowerPoint slide. There is actually a dog whistling, hidden innuendo to these quote unquote woke standards, where it's saying that Black people are not able to, practice these certain objective universal standards, and so they should be changed. It's really terrible. So these racial divisionist policies that are espoused in this training are not just particular to this training. Again, this wasn't just a one-off thing that happened to be told to individuals in this county on June 26, 2023. There seems to be a greater reality in this department specifically of treating some races differently than others. The district attorney, Pamela Price, issued a special directive in April of 2023, which, according to MacDonald, reading from her article, quote, creates a presumption that prosecutors will forswear higher sentences for particularly egregious crimes if those higher sentences would, quote, result in disparate racial impact. If a white person uses a gun during a crime, or if a white gang member commits a robbery, MacDonald says, he might face an enhanced sentence based on that gun use or gang membership. If the defendant is Black, however, he will be charged at the lowest possible level to avoid disparate racial impact. Only if a prosecutor receives permission from his supervisor may he pursue a higher sentence for a Black defendant. That's unbelievable. Other reasons for forswearing a so-called sentence enhancement are if the crime was connected to childhood trauma, or if a defendant's prior felonies were committed when he was a juvenile. So in other words, if a white person commits a crime, they want to give them the harshest sentence. If a black person commits a crime, they want to give them the lowest possible sentence because of this alleged disparate impact. That is racial favoritism and at the same time racial discrimination, because when you're favoring one person, you're discriminating against another. It sounds so obvious that it doesn't even need to be said, but shouldn't we be prosecuting people and giving them appropriate sentences based on the severity of their crime and not whatever group the perpetrator falls into? Isn't that the whole project of the United States of America, the thing that has made us different, the thing that we ought to be able to agree should be pursued so that all races, victims, perpetrators can be treated equally regardless of their background? Apparently not. And no wonder, as of July of 2023, Oakland's homicide count was up by 80% from 2019. That's according to the San Francisco Chronicle. Car break-ins are up 90% in Oakland, and assaults are up 40%. It's sort of like the illegal immigration problem in New York City, where Eric Adams a few minutes ago was saying, oh my gosh, we should allow all these immigrants to come in. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave. We should be a sanctuary city. Everyone is welcome. And then we see the results of the policies have been so terrible that he reversed his claim and said that this problem is, quote, destroying New York City. The consequences of his policies caught up to him. You can only wonder how much time it is going to take, how much more these homicide and car break-in and assault rates are going to have to go up for the same thing to happen in Oakland County and many other places where this craziness is embraced. So to zoom out on this story, to talk about really why it is important and why I'm bringing it to your attention, it's for two reasons. First, we hear often from people on the left who talk about conservatives that we are somehow exaggerating the prevalence and the threat of wokeism. This story is to arm you with a fact, to tell you that no, this is not just a fringe movement. These ideas and these attitudes, which start, at the dinner table, start on a college campus in a classroom, they fester and they become legitimate and they infiltrate real institutions that affect the lives of real people. And the second and more important thing is that this story, among others, indicates that we are fundamentally changing the principles of our country. It was said once upon a time that the left and the right wants the same things, they just have a different way of getting there. That's not really true anymore. It's not that the left and the right want different things. They actually want fundamentally different things. We see this with this story here. It is not that people on the left want to get to a place where perpetrators and victims are judged equally. Right here, they want to give some races, i.e. white people, a harder time than other races in the name of certain, top pie in the sky utopian principles. But the fact is that is not the same goal as the right wing, if it can even be called a conservative goal to just want to treat people equally. We see that with the way that Black Lives Matter rioters were treated versus January 6 rioters. They were given far shorter sentences. Many of them were not even put in jail. And if you look at January 6ers, many of them do deserve to have punishment for their crimes, but they should be treated equally as people who did the same thing, just for a different political cause. We see the way that conservative speakers are treated differently on college campuses than liberal speakers. It's totally okay to shout a conservative down, but it's not okay to shout a liberal speaker down. That shows you that we don't want the same things. There are some people in this country who think that depending on your skin color or on your political affiliation, you deserve to be treated differently. And then there are other people who say no. We need to come to a place in society where everyone is treated the same, regardless of those labels and those immutable characteristics. That's the bottom line. Thanks for being here. Reminder to hit the subscribe button down below if you enjoyed this video, and you can stay notified every time I post Julie Noted news clips or a timeless episode. I'll see you soon. Take care.